Welcome to another episode of Financial Freedom with Tom Hegna, where I introduce to you some of the top financial professionals from around the country, and I'm talking Main Street, not Wall Street. I'm excited about our next guest, Daniel Ronberg from Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thanks so much, Tom. Glad to be here.
Now, Daniel, I worked with your dad like 30 years ago, so I know a little bit about your background, but our audience doesn't. So tell us a little bit about how you got in the business.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to school for finance and ended up getting hired by JP Morgan right out of college. Started working there and got all licensed and trained. And then my dad, who's been in the business for 30 years, has a firm in Mesa, Arizona, and went to go work there in the family business, and I've been there ever since.
Now, you say that like you're on a mission. So what is your mission?
Yeah, my mission is to help people really realize their purpose with this season of life called retirement. And what does that really mean? Well, what that means is we've found, Tom, that when people go to retire, immediately there's this kind of tug of war in their heart between the abundance mindset and the scarcity mindset. And so using your process with a couple other things that we've added, we've really been able to help people to enjoy spending their money, enjoy their life, and know that they're going to be okay. And when we find that they're in the abundance mindset, they show up much more powerfully. You know, it's easy when you're working and money's flowing to feel abundant. Right. When your business is generating income, when you're making wages. When you retire and now it's up time for your money to make your income, oftentimes scarcity will creep in. People aren't necessarily as open to giving, they're not as generous, they're not going to take the vacation, they're not going to enjoy life as much. So what we found is if we apply your process correctly, we're able to help people know they have security so that way they give themselves permission to spend and enjoy.
But even those who are spending, Daniel, how do you make sure that they never run out of money? Because that's one of their key concerns.
Yeah, Tom, the first thing we always look at, and this is just going right back to your process, is we make sure they have enough guaranteed lifetime income. That's essential. That's essential for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't know how long anyone's going to live. So it's really important to make sure they're going to have guaranteed income for as long as they do live. And number two, if you look at the history of retirement in America, it used to be everybody just worked for a corporation, they ended up with a pension, and they had lifetime income for as long as they lived. There was no running out of money, there was no baby boomer dilemma, my job didn't exist. But now, you see what happens after they introduced the 401k in the late 80s, early 90s, they shifted from defined benefit to defined contribution, and what happened was they shifted the responsibility of retirement savings onto people with no financial training. You fast forward 40 years from there to today, and now we have this big crisis. We have a problem. People are not having enough money to live, and people aren't fully enjoying their money to the maximum that they can. And so that's why guaranteed lifetime income is so important. We look at those three sources: Social Security and how we can maximize that, if they do have a pension and how we can make sure they make the right choice with their pension, and then if they have some form of lifetime income annuity. Those are the three key sources that we use to make sure that people are going to know with certainty that they're not going to run out of money.
Now, another thing you tried is to help them enjoy their money in retirement. How do you do that?
Tom, that could be really difficult because oftentimes I'll get answers like, well, Daniel, you don't understand. There was a time when it was hard to come by food in our house. And I can certainly respect and appreciate that, of course. There may have been times where there was some form of scarcity and just because of the circumstances. But again, we want to try to help our clients evolve that experience over the rest of their life. And so with guaranteed lifetime income, if we can put enough in place so that they know with certainty they're going to have everything they want for their basic lifestyle and everything they want to enjoy their lifestyle on top of that, if we can keep that lifetime income increasing and we remove all the other key risks, our clients arrive at a place of abundance where they know with certainty, hey, I'm not going to run out of money. There's nothing that could come up that would end up wiping me out. And that gives them the freedom and permission to start to give themselves a little bit of leeway to spend. So, we don't really measure our success. We don't measure our success by how many clients we have. We measure it by when we get a text message of our clients on the Disney cruise, with their family or traveling the RV around the country or, making memories and enjoying life.
So now, Daniel, sometimes one spouse is worried that the other spouse is going to die. How do you handle when there's a spouse that's concerned about, one spouse predeceasing the other?
Yeah, it happens all the time, Tom. The first thing we always look at is what does the income picture look like in the beginning? I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting with a couple and we start talking about their pension and he tells me in front of her, yeah, when I die, my pension's going to stop. And she looks like white as a ghost. Like, what do you mean the pension's going to stop, right? Well, that's a real problem, right? Making sure that there's continuity in the retirement income so that she's not going to be left hanging. And I say she because typically for every one 90-year-old client I have like 9 90-year-old women. So typically, like I've heard you say, retirement is really more of a woman's issue. where they're going to live with those consequences. And so we look at those, what type of income do they have and how can we maximize that the right way to make sure that the surviving spouse is going to be taken care of. Beyond that, there's often phenomenal tools like life insurance and other ways that you can actually just make sure that you can use those fuller, complete incomes, and then when you pass, that full tax-free estate will pass to your spouse and make sure that they're going to be able to turn that into income. So that's a big thing we look at, is we look at what's the economic impact of losing your spouse, and we look at it from what is it going to be from an income perspective, what is going to change for your taxes, and we make sure that that lifestyle need is going to be met.
There's an interesting product out there called a first to die life insurance policy that works really good to protect Social Security benefits. So you cover both the husband and wife. Whoever dies first, there's a death benefit to help replace that Social Security check.
Yeah, that's often a form of life insurance you don't see as much, but it's really powerful. Second to die and first to die life insurance can really be the difference in leaving that meaningful legacy for the family and then making sure that your spouse is protected.
Now, Daniel, what's your value proposition? People can go to all these different financial advisors. What's your value proposition to the clients?
I'm really blessed, Tom, that I work with an amazing team of strategic partners. So, at Nations First Financial, we have, I play one role on the team, but we have advisors, we have attorneys, CPAs, lenders, real estate professionals, bankers. And so my function on the team is to really help remove key risks in retirement. That's what I do. But we have this really robust team of strategic partners. And so if you ever heard of a concept like a family office for ultra wealthy individuals, we try to emulate that as much as we can for our clients, because one of the things we've noticed is it's very difficult for a client to go communicate between their CPA, their banker, their advisor, their insurance professional. The burden is on them to make sure that they're not only understanding the information, but then able to communicate it to those other professionals so that the team can work together. We have that team approach at Nations First Financial, and it's just an honor to be a part of. Our clients really enjoy that. And the other thing that I think brings kind of a unique perspective to what we offer is, because my dad and I are so different in age, he has been a mentor of mine, so he's been giving me that great training for all those years. But me being younger, I've learned a lot of innovative strategies as well. So I bring kind of a unique perspective to the practice, where the two of us together have been able to really offer tremendous value to our clients.
You've been in the business for a few years. What do you like most about being in the financial services industry?
Tom, I want to do this for the next 40, 50 years. I feel very blessed that I've been able to find this so young. I've been doing it for 13 years as of the taping of this right now. And I love getting a chance to serve people. That's what my mission is. It's about how we can take care of our clients and how we can make sure everybody's going to have everything they need. And that conversation, going back to my mission of helping people realize that it's okay to spend and enjoy, me getting to sit in my conference room with a client, and then 8 months later, their whole family is on a cruise somewhere in Europe, that brings me tremendous joy, and I love it. And it's not all about travel. There's other things too that are really important. It's been put on my heart that one day I want to start a charity designed for widows, because the one person I've never been able to help, and I feel like if I sit with people, I can help almost anybody. Maybe it's an idea, maybe it's encouragement, maybe it's an introduction, maybe it's something I can actually do. The one person I've never been able to help, Tom, is the little 77-year-old widow who ran out of money and is now living on Social Security and kind of slowly dwindling down. That has always broken my heart. And so I feel like over the next 50 years, Nations First is going to be a phenomenal profit center to be able to contribute to some type of charitable organization that can potentially offer like a stipend for these widows and make sure that they can get their standard of living back in retirement. That's where my heart is.
If somebody's approaching retirement, let's say in the next 5 years, what are some of the biggest concerns that they have?
If they're 5 years away from retirement, Tom, I'm going to look at several key things. Number one is just job security. I'm terrified for all of these executives in America right now that are making $300,000-400,000 grand, and AI and the government are right around the corner slashing jobs right and left. So that's a big concern for me, is how are they going to have that job security to make sure they're going to be able to retire. The other thing is starting your process early. So many people, it breaks my heart, Tom, that I've heard over the years say, oh, well, I was going to retire, but then 2008 happened. And if they follow the process in your book, that doesn't ever have to be the case. If they take on those risks early enough and neutralize them, then they're going to be okay to be able to retire. And those risks are the same for pretty much everybody. Do they have too much volatility risk? Are they too sensitive to interest rate risk? What if taxes and inflation go up? And then the ones in retirement, what if they need long-term care? What if a spouse passes away? Timing and sequence risk. If we can neutralize those properly before they retire, like pre-retirement, then they're going to be able to retire on their terms and take the control over that situation and not be so vulnerable to the job market or the economy or whatever.
Now you mentioned long-term care, and that is a huge risk. And I always say no retirement plan is complete without a plan for long-term care. It's the one thing most people forget about that can wipe out their entire life's work. So how do you handle that long-term care risk?
Tom, long-term care is very personal for me. I watched my grandma go through 8 years of skilled nursing. She went through $1 million needing around-the-clock care, which again, 8 years of skilled nursing is very rare. She had a stroke one night and the whole family drove up to Barrows in Phoenix and they flew her in and said, say goodbye to grandma because she's not going to make it through the morning. Well, she lived 8 more years and needing full long-term care. Luckily, my grandfather and her were great planners and they prepared and that she had a nest egg to use. But I've seen that what kind of money somebody can go through, a family can go through providing care for a loved one. So it's very, very important to me that we do that proactively. And I think there's a real revelation in our industry of all kinds of phenomenal asset-based long-term care plans now that you can provide where people don't want to buy long-term care because they go, well, what if I don't need it? Or what if it's too expensive? Or what happens if I don't end up needing care is really the big concern. So now there's all kinds of plans you can utilize to actually provide long-term care benefits with their existing assets. So if they have CDs, if they have money markets, fixed annuities, you can actually reposition some of those assets to an asset-based long-term care plan where they can still keep control of the asset, but now have a tremendous tax-free benefit on top of that. And that's been a really, really big revelation just in the last 10 years that's helped my clients tremendously.
When you're meeting with your clients and you're trying to assess where they are and what they need, they may say they want something, but how do you assess what they really need in retirement?
That's a good question, Tom. It goes back to the framework of that process that I've talked about a couple of times that really you taught me, which is, the first thing we always have to do is look at what are their basic need for expenses. How are we going to maximize that core retirement income? Because if you don't have income, you don't have a retirement. So we got to make sure we take care of the income first. Beyond that, then we look at what are the key risks that they're susceptible to. If they have all of their money in 401ks and IRAs, what happens if taxes go up? If they don't have any inflation protection, we've seen what inflation looks like right now. It can be extremely expensive for a retiree. So we just go through the process and neutralize those key risks. And what we found is when we do that properly, the probability of portfolio failure in retirement is really zero. We can make sure that they're going to be able to have everything they need for as long as they live. And what's interesting is what we found is our clients, their wealth will typically explode after we take care of those key risks because now they're not using this portfolio to balance all of these things that you could just create an intentional bucket for with minimal amount of money, answer that problem right there, and then now that gives them a new time horizon, a new risk capacity. It gives them more time to be able to build wealth actually in retirement, and that's what helps take care of some of those wants. When they arrive at that place, that's going to allow them to know, hey, you know what, it's okay to go ahead and spend a little bit of this.
You also help people with investments. How do you balance risk and reward when you're setting up an investment portfolio for a client?
Well, Tom, we leave that to the advisors that we work with through Nations First. So we have some phenomenal portfolio managers, investment advisors that will come in and help manage the portfolio. But they love working with me because typically when you sit down with a client and let's say you're managing their assets, you have to keep a percentage in bonds for the safety, and then they typically want to get as much into the stock market as they can to try to grow the portfolio, right? Well, when I come in and I can say, okay, let's go ahead and neutralize long-term care risk with this little amount of money. Let's go ahead and neutralize the risk of you losing your spouse. Let's go ahead and neutralize tax risk. Let's go ahead and neutralize longevity risk. Well, that just lets them do what they're good at, which is grow the money. And so we work together in tandem really, really nicely with me being on risk management and removing those key risks. That allows them to just take the portfolio and continue to build it. And we have a phenomenal relationship. And our clients really understand that, right? It's like if you're going to use a tool for safety, why not make it guaranteed? Right. And maximize the cash flow from it. And that's really what we try to do.
Now, I know another concern that clients have is, life happens, things change, and you want to build flexibility into the plan. So how do you build flexibility into your plans?
I think it starts with liquidity. That's really important. And when I say liquidity, I mean, we talk about this thing called an abundance fund, which is basically, and there's all these goofy rules, 12, 24 months expenses. When people are on guaranteed lifetime income, you don't even really need that. That's more for when you're working. But, we try to make sure that you have, we also call it sleep well at night money that's just in the bank that it may not have any significance or relevance to your retirement plan, but it just makes you feel good and happy. Some clients go, I got to see 100 grand in the bank, or I just don't feel comfortable. I got to see 50 grand or whatever the number is. We make sure we really honor that and make sure we help clients to maintain that, and we check in with them on that to make sure they're feeling good about their decisions. But the other thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we have the ability to make changes as time goes on, right? Life happens, people get divorced, people die, people get remarried, all kinds of things happen, and so we need that flexibility to be able to come in and say, hey, you have the control to pivot. If something comes up, you're not locked in and married to this strategy for the rest of your life. That's why the liquidity is so important.
Now, I've seen some of the things you've written about, speaking about how important it is to have multiple streams of income in retirement. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Social Security doesn't seem to really cut it for most Americans to be able to take care of their lifestyle expenses in retirement. Now, not everybody's blessed to have a pension. I know you served in the military. Fortunately, you're going to be covered on the pension deal. And some people that work for municipalities and the government, they are going to get a pension. But most Americans won't now. And so having Social Security as a pillar of lifetime income is important. Obviously, we want to maximize that, and there's several great strategies to do that. Beyond there, we want to make sure we have increasing lifetime income, because having a stagnant income for the next 30, 40 years is not going to help somebody when inflation is making things more and more expensive. We've seen that right now. So that's one of the things we try to take care of for our clients is how do we create intentional buckets of income that'll deploy in whatever increment they need. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's every 2.5 years. But basically, that way they have multiple streams of income they can turn on. And as they want to enjoy and spend more, they're able to say, hey, you know what? I'm good. Let's turn on another stream of income and keep enjoying.
How do you address like the healthcare inflation? I mean, I guess it's just part of the overall inflation, but how do you handle that?
You know, Tom, what we've noticed is aside from the mortgage, health insurance is now one of the biggest barriers to people's retirement. People will work till 65 because they want to make sure they have health insurance because the premiums are so expensive now. So that's been a real challenge. You know, we look to see, is there anything they can do to maximize the employee benefits they're offered through their employer first? But then beyond there, we say, okay, you know, one strategy that's very common is something called a bridge strategy. So for example, if somebody wants to retire at 62, you know, you meet those people who are just like, I can't stomach this another 6 months. I'm not going till 65. You know, we can look at how can we create some liquidity for them to take from 62 to 65 to bridge that premium until they get on a Medicare. And that intentional budgeting for that specific purpose is what allows them to know that they can retire with confidence, as long as it doesn't rob, you know, the long-term income from the portfolio for the rest of their life. As long as we do it prudently, then we know that they're going to be able to retire when they want and enjoy it. You know, one of the saddest things for me, Tom, is somebody really kind of, you know, trying to stick it out and then they end up getting sick, you know, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure if someone tells us, hey, I'm done, we help to see if we can actually help them make sure that they're...
How do you protect your clients from the inevitable economic downturn that will happen at some point?
You know, I think it goes back to making sure people have the right risk capacity dialed in. You know, a lot of times people will come into my office and they'll say, oh, I have an advisor and I'm all conservative. And then I look at their stuff and it's like the riskiest stuff you could have, right? So I think sometimes it's just making sure you're paying attention to what it is that's actually in alignment with you, and then, you know, making those adjustments accordingly. Again, I'm not the advisor at Nations First. I do some of the other work there. But, you know, we really do a good job making sure we learn from our clients what is their true risk capacity, both from what they feel and their previous experience and from what their portfolio says they actually need. If they're taking on too much risk, then that might be a conversation to have about, you know, maybe utilizing tools that might be safer, that offer guarantees, that offer protection of their principal.
You know, we've talked about taxes. We're $36 trillion in debt. We're adding a $1 trillion about every 85 or 90 days. I believe taxes are probably going to have to go up. I know you're a big believer in tax-free retirement income. Kind of tell us how you can set up some of those streams.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite subject of all because, you know, everybody looks to their CPA to say, how can I reduce taxes? That's how they measure the value of their CPA, is how much they save them on taxes. And again, I'm not a CPA, but I think it really is frustrating when I look at my industry and I see how many men and women just kind of throw up their hands on the tax thing and go, well, I'm not a CPA, go talk to your CPA about this. What I think we have a responsibility to do, Tom, is if we're going to be setting up somebody's income, and that's going to be creating taxes in their retirement, I think we have a responsibility to have at least a basic fundamental understanding of how they can structure that in a more efficient way for them. So one of the things we look at right out of the gate is what is their taxes going to be in retirement? You know, we talked about the value we bring to people. Well, I'm surprised at how many people come to my office and they don't know what their tax rate's going to be in retirement. How are you planning for your deductions today if you don't know what your taxes are going to be tomorrow? And so, you know, none of us know what tax rates are going to go to, but we do know that under the current rules, there is a standard deduction. And so people are often shocked, Tom, when they come to my office and I go, okay, well, here's your Social Security, here's the amount of income you need, you're in the 0% tax bracket. And they go, what is that? I've never heard of that before, right? It's the standard deduction. It's the tax-free withdrawal privilege. So we try to look at that first and see if there's ways we can maximize that bracket for them. So for example, we'll have people come into our office who are maybe in their 70s, and they'll be taking Social Security and a required minimum distribution. But then we look at them and we go, you know, do you realize you have about $7,000 more in that zero bracket you could take? And if we did that for the next 10 years, you'd get income tax liability off 70 grand, completely tax-free. And they have no idea. And so again, I don't think it really requires a CPA. That's not tax advice. That's just basic understanding of the tax code. And again, the burden's not on the client to understand that. It's on our industry to help them and educate them on that. The other thing that I see a lot, Tom, and this has become much more relevant now that interest rates are higher, is people unintentionally creating interest income expense on their tax return. So for example, we'll have all these people that go, oh, I gotta lower my taxes. What am I gonna do? And they're making 350 grand a year pre-retirement, and they have $500,000 in CDs at the bank. And it's like, hey, you know, if you were able to shift that to tax deferred until you retired, that would save you quite a bit of money on the taxation of that interest. Now you flip that into retirement, and you have people go, well, how can I protect my pension? Well, again, you can utilize tools like modified endowment contracts, fixed annuities that can get very similar rates of return, but are now going to be tax deferred. And now you can maximize your 0% bracket, you can maximize your 10% bracket just by taking control of how and when you pay your taxes. Those are probably two of the simplest low-hanging fruit strategies that I see that a lot of people just don't know about or take advantage of.
Of all the risks out there, longevity is the number one risk because it multiplies all the other risks. Because the longer you live, the more likely the market will crash, the more likely to raise your taxes, the more likely you need long-term care. So how do you help your clients mitigate or take that longevity risk off the table?
Well, you bring up a good point, Tom. The fastest growing population on planet Earth is the population of centurions. We're getting more people turning 100 every single day. And it just goes back to making sure that we have the right framework to help them, right? We're going to need guaranteed lifetime income. You know, there's a lot of talk in our industry about this thing called the 4% rule. Some people have now downgraded it to the 1.8% rule. Whatever the number is, I can tell you this, no male in my family has lived past age 80. Every woman on my wife's side of the family has lived to either be in their 90s or 100s. So with my wife and two daughters, I'm not leaving them behind with the 4% rule. I'm leaving them behind with guaranteed contractual things that are going to protect them for as long as they live.
Now, you do work with some older people. You've worked with a lot of people in their 90s. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from them in working with people in their 90s?
You know, that's one of the other things I didn't get to mention in that question you asked about what's my favorite part about being in the industry. It's that, you know, I run 20 to 25 meetings with my clients a week, and I have the blessing of every single day getting to sit with people who give me that perspective and remind me to bring flowers home to Jennifer, spend time with my little girls, you know, stop and smell the roses and enjoy life. So I get that perspective reminder like 5-6 times a day sometimes. But the key thing I've learned from people in their 90s is you have to make sure you plan for that time when you're not going to be able to take care of yourself. Often, if you're lucky enough to live into your 90s, and again, it depends on the quality of life you want, but a lot of times you really need to make sure you have those key things put in place to cover you for income. So, you know, I recently did an interview where we were talking about the FIRE movement, and I caught a lot of flack from people who were saying, oh, well, why are you so regimented on these, you know, contractual guarantees that annuities provide? If you retire at 40 with real estate, you're fine. I said, I get all that, but come talk to some 90-year-olds sometime and come see how they feel. They're not retiring with their real estate. They want things that are gonna just be paychecks that they can count on and make sure they're gonna have enough money.
See, everybody loves real estate when they're in their 30s and 40s. Oh, I'll fix that, I'll fix that. I've met a lot of people in their 80s and 90s, and now these are tax bombs. They've taken all the tax break. Now that needs a new roof, that needs a new air conditioner, that needs a new furnace, and they become a ball and chain. So for all hyped up as everybody are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s about real estate in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, they'd like to get rid of it.
Yeah, there's a season for everything. You know, I love real estate. I own plenty of real estate, and I encourage people that I think it's a really phenomenal asset class. I love it, but I'm in my mid-30s. I know one day when I'm in my 80s, I'm not going to want the headaches. And so, you know, I'll probably need to turn that over to my girls or convert that into some form of income that's, you know, much more stable.
Now, I think you've had some stories of people who've shifted their mindset from the accumulation mindset to the distribution mindset. Can you share some of those with us?
Yeah, that's been one of my greatest accomplishments, is really getting a chance when people really open up, Tom, and we form that relationship. Like, all my clients end up becoming friends and family. It's really a beautiful way to get a chance to work. But when they really open up and they allow me to come in and just have deep conversation, and this doesn't happen overnight. Nobody's one way for 40 years and then comes into my office one day and goes, okay, I'm ready to start spending money. It doesn't work that way. This takes a decade of getting a chance to work with them, really getting them to understand fully that they're going to be okay. And once they get to the point where they realize, they go, oh my gosh, I feel so good knowing that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay and you're taking care of me. That's one of the greatest, most significant responsibilities that any of us could get the privilege of enjoying. So seeing that shift in them where they fully understand what they have, they understand the key risks that could come up, they understand that they've neutralized them, and now they know that there's some excess money to spend and enjoy, that's where you start to see them enjoy it. And I tell my clients all the time, one of my earliest memories is my grandparents took us on their 50th anniversary cruise. I was 5 years old. I still remember that. And when I tell my clients that, they start to realize, there is significance in investing some of this money back into the family to take them and make memories while we can, because it'll be with them for the rest of their life.
Daniel, this has been an awesome interview. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, they say, man, I want to do business with that guy. How could they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm really committed to increasing our YouTube channel. That's one great place to reach out to me. You can go to Daniel Ronberg, just type that in YouTube and I pop right up. And there's a link down in the description. You can reach out and actually get a time right on my calendar. You could also just call the office in Mesa where I work. It's 480-981-7557.
Thanks, Daniel. It's been great having you today. And thank you for watching another episode of Financial Freedom with Tom Hegna.